24 debate. If you missed part one, we saw the exclusive report by James Andre, who's with us again, on that highlights the tension inside Iraq on this a day that's seen the worst killings in 5 months in a string of bombings. Also with us, Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP, and from Washington, the author of Barefoot in Baghdad, A Story of Identity, Manal Omar of the United States Institute of Peace. Welcome back to all three of you. Let's go to the issue of this Thursday's blasts again, and perhaps call up a map that shows where they happened. We see that there were several attacks in Baghdad, as Manal Omar was saying, in Sadr City, also in Kadamiyya, and in Nasiriyah. Can we go over, just for people who don't know Iraq very well, Dave Clark, why are those areas targeted?
Well, those are all three are areas which are largely Sunni Shiite population, and obviously, if you're hitting civilians, you're going to be hitting largely Shiite civilians. It's also, as our colleague said, it strikes at the heart of Nouri al-Maliki's legitimacies, because these are really areas that he should have under control. If there are any areas in Iraq that he should control, Nasiriyah is a Shiite city and was relatively peaceful even in 2006, 2007, and then Hadamiyah and Sadr City obviously were set as a militia activity during the war, but they're fairly mono-sectarian population.
And how long is the list of possible suspects?
It's a huge list of possible suspects. I mean, people will say it was Sunni extremists, but that covers all sorts of different motivations and all sorts of different different possible groups. You could start with Ansar al-Sunnah or Al-Qaeda, some kind of extremist terrorist group who's just attempting to spread chaos, undermine the government, and generate some kind of sectarian civil war so that the area is ungovernable and they can prosecute their jihad. We could also look at Sunni political factions or tribal factions who feel they're being excluded from power under Nouri al-Maliki's increasingly authoritarian rule from the center. I'm sure on the streets of Baghdad today there'll be all sorts of paranoid rumors about inside jobs, about Shiites bombing their own in order to generate chaos and keep people under the thumb of the security forces. There'll be all sorts of different theories going on today, but most people will blame this on Sunni extremists.
All right,
as a kind of catch-all.
Who to blame? Locals pretty unanimous when they went on camera on that score.
We hold the government responsible for such attacks. The politicians are bickering over the seats, and poor people are being killed in these blasts.
Blood is being shed freely. Who is to blame? Who's responsible for this? We hold those who fight for power and authority responsible for this. They have to sit and discuss ways of solving the problems plaguing the country, or we will all fall into the abyss.
Manal Omar, do you agree that this is down to irresponsible politicians fanning the flames of sectarian hate?
I think that's definitely what most Iraqis on the ground are saying. There's a lot of frustration over the political divisions that have been happening and the fact that it's now resorting back to violence. The difference between now and between 2006 and 2007, as other colleagues have said, which is the actual level, is that people have tasted sectarian violence and they do not want to go back to that. And they feel that the government is using political will. One of the things that was discussed about the federalization is, Anbar and Salahuddin, which are two areas that are homogeneous, but Diyala actually does have a mixed group of Kurds and Shia, and there's a fear that there's all this back dealings that are taking place, potentially an alliance between the Kurdish party and the Sunni party on Diyala, and all of this is fostering frustration over the violence that, in reality, the everyday Iraqi citizen is having to pay for.
Do you have the feeling, Manal Omar, when you were in Baghdad, how strong was the hate between Sunnis and Shias?
I think that the strongest emotion, I think particularly if you look within Iraq, and I was in Baghdad just last month, I think the strongest sense is regret and a fear of going back to the times of violence. Now, most people will tell me that that's the logical side of them talking. They've tasted sectarian violence, they do not want to go back. The number of widows, the number of orphans is always mentioned in conversation. But those same people will admit that there is also an emotional button. And when politicians push that emotional button, even the most logical person will react. So I wouldn't say that they won't go back to sectarian violence, but there is an awareness and a dedication to try and not let it happen again.
James Andre, did you get a feel for that the emotional button being not too far away at any point?
Yeah, well, for example, when we spoke to the sheikhs in Al-Anbar, I mean, they were telling us that they've been driving around the country and that they were shocked to see, flags, Shiite flags and, flags with the face of Hussein on checkpoints, on military vehicles, on official buildings. They think that is very shocking. They were also shocked to see, and I mean, it's true, there were flags absolutely all over the place, on every bridge, in every street. So it's quite impressive. We spoke to the Christians who were saying, we're going to tone down our Christmas this year because we don't want to provoke the Shiites. So there was really there was this feeling that indeed, that emotional button is there, and that there is kind of that it's not very far under the surface. Then again, I do agree, people do not want any, regular people don't want any sectarian violence right now.
All right, and we can also look at the issue that we brought up in part one and in your report, which is what those leaders were all talking about, which is the issue of how federal Iraq's government should be. We could look at the map of those three provinces that make up the so-called Sunni belt. In the north there you see is Kurdistan. James, you visited those provinces, and in fact, it's in those Kurdish provinces where the country's vice president, Tariq al-Hashemi, has been staying since the country's prime minister put out an arrest warrant for him. Dave Clark, the timing of all this, as the Americans are pulling out, was this carefully stage managed?
Well, there's been tension between them for a very long time, and it's tempting to link it to the American pullout. But the Americans have had very little influence on a political level in Iraq for many years now, and the force they had left behind in the last 12 months was fairly irrelevant even to the security of Iraqis. I was just looking back over the figures to compare today's bombings with last January. Last January there were 3 bombings that had more than 50 casualties in each one of them in the first month of the year. So in a sense, not much has changed with the withdrawal of the American soldiers. I think more interestingly is that there was an attack in the Green Zone, which Nouri al-Maliki claims was an assassination attempt on him, and which he's now pinning on his vice prime minister, rightly or wrongly, who knows? And that happened just before the American pullout. So a lot of things are happening at once, but I'm not sure whether the American pullout per se is what has unleashed this. I mean, this is the Constitution as itself is badly designed. This is a feature, not a bug of the Iraqi Constitution. The fact that these rival groups are forced into this government together and will not sit down together.
The Prime Minister, as we said at the outset, easing off in the past few days, reneging on his threat to sack ministers who don't toe the line.
He has temporarily replaced them, however. If they're not going to be there, then there's going to be somebody else sitting in their chair on the cabinet table. So yes, he's not sacked them. I don't think he's got a constitutional right to sack them. I think Parliament would have to approve any sackings. Yes, so he's not saying that they're going to be arrested, or he's not saying they're going to be sacked, but they're not sitting around a table with him.
Now, it's interesting. If we could listen to what Maliki said at a New Year's Eve ceremony celebrating the departure of those U.S. troops.
Iraq has regained its political and economic health and is more secure. All this in a short period of time and with the presence of foreign forces on its land, and despite the efforts to keep Iraq isolated and weakened by its wounds, pains and troubles.
All the efforts of scheming, who is he talking about in that?
Well, his audience can decide when they listen to him who they're talking about. He's clearly including America in that. And the efforts to isolate him, again, he's celebrating the Americans who put him into power, but he'd be glad to see the back of them.
Manal Omar, is Nouri al-Maliki his own man, or is he taking his orders from Tehran, taking his orders from somebody else?
I think it's hard to say exactly where he's taking his orders from. I don't necessarily think he's his own man in the sense that he has a very close network of advisors that are all Iraqi, based in Iraq. Some of them are MPs, and they're all part of the political party. I think, as was mentioned before, Maliki was seen as the least threatening person during the initial debate, which is why he got the seat. And I think he has surrounded himself by advisors that he's constantly consulting with. How much that ties to Iran, how much that ties to other influences, I think is open for debate. I wouldn't say that he's completely in the pocket of Iran, like some other political leaders who are associated more clearly. I think that it's part of the circumstances that are taken into factor when decisions are made, but definitely not the only part. And I think he has been able to show some independence beyond, Iran and other influences. And I would tie him more to those advisors again.
And Manal Omar, you said you were back there last month, and from what Dave was just mentioning a moment ago, we have a situation now after a year of it took a year to form a government. Now we're headed for a new period of huge political gridlock with the opposition boycotting parliament. Can Iraq just sort of plod along?
I think it has to. I think the reality is that's the situation that they're in. While I was in Iraq, I met with senior Iraqi officials and as well as members of civil society, which I think is a crucial element here. As civil society has matured, if there's any silver lining in the last 8 years, it is Iraqi civil society. And one of the things that they both seemed to agree on was that the artificial power dynamics that have been in place, particularly with the unity government, are now being questioned. And so perhaps it will be a difficult road, but it will be a more natural power dynamic that will emerge because it'll be Iraqi-led. I think the biggest thing they pointed out about the U.S. withdrawal is although the U.S. has not had a lot of influence, soldiers have definitely not been in on the streets. The biggest issue is the sense that there was a referee present, and people felt that had kept Maliki and maybe some neighboring countries in check. Now that the referee is out, there is concern about an all approach in terms of exerting power over the country.
And James Andre, when you were in Sadr City, how did you did the locals talk to you at all about Nouri al-Maliki? How did they feel about the Prime Minister?
Well, they were, to be honest, they were very much more with Muqtada al-Sadr, who is, you were talking about it, but very much...
who Maliki attacked a few years back.
Attacked a few years back, and who is now,
Kingmaker in Parliament again.
Yes, exactly. He's got 41 seats at the Parliament right now, and he's very strongly linked to Iran. So, but it's... I think it's it's a different story between Muqtada al-Sadr and Nouri al-Maliki, even though they're on the same side of the political checkboard. But still, it's people there were really talking about
talking about Muqtada al-Sadr
much more than Nouri al-Maliki at that stage.
All right, and when you had, for instance, what we saw one of the spokesmen there talking about the ability to defend ourselves. When he means the ability to defend ourselves, who is he talking about? Is he talking about the people in Sadr City? Is he talking about Shias as a whole? What does he mean?
Well, in fact, the thing is, both sides were kind of saying, and this is both in Al-Anbar, for example, when we saw the Sahwa, and in Sadr City, they were all saying, if there is a problem, and this problem was kind of undefined, we will defend ourselves. And basically, they were also flexing their muscles for us or for the press. And Al-Anbar, for example, this when you see all the vehicles passing by, that was kind of organized for the local press and for us also. They had all the vehicles come out, and they just showed us all the guns they had, basically. And when we went to Sadr City, we were also invited. I mean, you can't walk into Sadr City; you have to be invited. And the man that you see that takes us in, I mean, he came to collect us, and then he escorted us right to where the sequence was filmed, which is right in front of Muqtada al-Sadr's HQ in the center of Baghdad, and he just he let us film there. But what I'm saying is that they were also there to show us we still have military power. Both sides were trying to show us that very clearly. That's how we felt it when we were there.
All right, so everyone flexing their muscles. We've talked about the Sunnis, we've talked about the Shiites. What about the Kurds in the north? They also have a heck of a lot to lose if Iraq goes pear-shaped.
The Constitution stipulates that a federal system should be implemented. Therefore, neither Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki nor I, nor anyone else has the right to object. Preventing the implementation of constitutional articles will mean the country will have to face huge problems. This will bring about disaster.
What's going to happen now if it really comes to a head between Sunnis and Shias to the Kurds in the north, who've enjoyed relative stability?
And indeed did so before the U.S. invasion as well. They were in a semi-protected area beforehand, and obviously they suffered greatly in the Anfal massacres of the 1980s. But since they were able to run their own region, they have had relative stability. We wouldn't have got them into the post-war Iraq had there not been a constitution that guaranteed them autonomy. But you can't write a constitution saying only Kurds have that right. So now you have the ticking time bomb in the constitution that other provinces can now demand autonomy, and it might be the Sunnis next, as the report suggests. And then will the Sunnis then form their provinces into a unit in the way that the three Kurdish provinces have formed a unit? And even then, there are mixed provinces bordering that. The Kurds would very much like to say the city of Kirkuk come back under their control, but that's a divided city. It's not just a question of Arabs and Kurds. Between the Arabs, there are Shiites and Sunnis, and there are also Turkmen. Kirkuk's a very complicated city. Now, in the Kurdish mind, it's a Kurdish city. They talk about it as their Jerusalem, and we know how hard it's been to decide who runs Jerusalem.
All right, before we go, Manal Omar, the last time we were discussing Iraq on this very set, one of the guests was pointing out that really it wasn't much of a nation state founded by the West, really, and it was only under a reign of terror by Saddam Hussein that there was a relative stability. Is Iraq a nation state? Do you have that feeling when you're in Baghdad?
That's a challenge if you go historically to the entire region, not only to Iraq, but I think that there is a definite sense of Iraqiness that can be developed. And Iraqis are frustrated with those choices, either a dictator who forces unity or complete chaos. And I think that what's trying to be developed here is a third model where through a system and a process they can actually create a nation state. But it's still definitely in formation.
And you're optimistic?
I'm cautiously optimistic, like I said, because I work closely with civil society, with women, with minorities who are fighting for their rights. That leaves me optimistic that their voices won't completely be crushed.
All right, Manal Omar of the United States Institute for Peace, thanks for joining us from Washington. Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP, and France 24's James Andre. You can see that report again in full in Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's Time for Business. That's hosted by Marcus Carlson.
Watch France 24 live and free on your mobile phone. Anywhere in the world, on almost any cell phone, whatever your provider. Watch France 24 live and in 3 languages. France 24 on your mobile phone. Just visit our website, france24.com, and click on mobile. Select your phone brand, enter your phone number, and you'll receive a free SMS telling you how to install our player. You can watch France 24 live and get the latest world news for free on your mobile.